Hello everybody, my name is James Dearsley, working here on behalf of BuyAssociation, and I'm joined once more by Paul Collins here and Louise Reynolds from Property Venture, and Paul, obviously one of the directors from BuyAssociation, and I'll bring them in a second. But here we are, we're talking about the Spanish property market and how it's doing and where it's going and what it's done recently. It's been up and down like a yo-yo. There's been a lot of conflicting reports, a lot of conflicting statistical analysis out there, and what we wanted to try and do is bring Louise in here to talk a little bit about sort of trying to differentiate what is fact from fiction, really. So without further ado, let me just introduce them all and let them talk a little bit about themselves and what they're doing. So Louise, do you want to start us all off?
Yeah, well, I'm Louise Reynolds, Director of Property Venture. We help people buy holiday homes and investment properties in Spain, both on the Costas and what seems to be of interest at the moment, the cities. Help people do that more safely and easily than they can do on their own. And buyers get the best of both worlds because they get foreign national buyer advice from ourselves, plus also the local in-market knowledge through the partners that we work with in Spain.
Lovely, thanks Louise. And Paul, go ahead, tell us a little bit about BuyAssociation.
Good morning here. My name's Paul Collins. I'm a director at BuyAssociation. We provide a global, credible one-stop shop for people buying property overseas and looking to invest in property and other investments overseas.
From ourselves, plus also the local in-market in Spain.
Paul, go ahead, tell us a little bit about BuyAssociation.
Good morning here. My name's Paul Collins. I'm a director at
Hang on, there we go. Is that unmuted? There we go. There we go. So yeah, there's a variety of places you can watch this on, and unfortunately I had one of them playing in the background, so there's a huge delay coming in there, so it's a bit unnerving, but sorry Paul. I don't know if that conflicted, but do you just want to again, very, very quickly just bring in BuyAssociation and what they do? Sorry about that.
Yeah, absolutely. BuyAssociation, we are a global one-stop shop for people looking to invest in property and other investments overseas. We provide, as I say, a one-stop shop with all kinds of information, buying guides, newsletters, and access to a huge amount of different investments worldwide.
Lovely, thanks for that, Paul. And really, that is partly the problem I had before is because you can be watching this on the BuyAssociation website. So if you are on the BuyAssociation website and you want to take part in this conversation, by all means do send us a tweet. And you can tweet us using the BA Live hashtag. Alternatively, if you are watching it, I think actually on the BuyAssociation site, there is a form underneath it which you can fill in and let us know your thoughts, and we can hopefully put it towards Paul and to Louise. So Louise, let me just start off. I mean, there's been a lot of interesting news recently about this abdication, and perhaps we can sort of start from there as to what that means with the Spanish property market and Spain in general, about its economy, and you know, it's had some real movement over the last few years. So how's that affecting us?
In terms of the abdication, I'm not sure there's a direct correlation between King Juan Carlos abdicating and the property market, but I think it's just another newsworthy item of what's happening in Spain, and I think it's just indicative of what the country's going through at the minute. I think that King Carlos has done an awful lot for the country and for the democracy post-Franco era, but I think what with the economic woes and the general feeling of the population, I think that he's sort of been a magnet for bad news in recent times. You've got a lot of bad press about his trip to Botswana when he was on a shooting trip, and that was deemed to be sort of out of kilter with the general population and the economic woes that everybody was going through and what they were suffering. It just seemed a bit decadent. And then, of course, there's been the been embroiled in controversy with his son-in-law, Bedangarin, who's been accused of financial corruption, and that's kind of dragged the royal family in as well. So I think that probably for a number of Spanish people, and that it's probably the end of an era for them, and they're probably wondering, well, why didn't this happen sooner? But it seems that his son Prince Felipe will take over. He seems to be a bit more cosmopolitan, university education, a number of languages under his belt. I suspect that he will breathe new life into the royal family and may well be more of a welcome person at the helm of the royal family in Spain, and that maybe King Carlos's popularity has waned somewhat over the last few years.
I think quite often with when you have these sort of changes of regime, it does help to kind of renew the mood in the country as well, and it helps to sort of promote a lot of other kind of new developments to come along as well. So hopefully it'll provide a bit of an impetus for the economy, for the general population as well. So hopefully it should have quite a wide effect in Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I always thought he was quite popular, wasn't he? The king in his early days, and now I think his son is relatively liked, isn't he?
Yeah, that's my view, because he's a bit more cosmopolitan, a bit more forward-thinking. It'll be interesting to see what stance he takes on moving the family forwards, and also just keeping unity within Spain. With calls from the Catalans to for independence and trying to bring the country together. So he's probably in a better position to help with that sort of unifying effect rather than King Carlos. It seems that his probably had his day and done his bit in terms of helping shape democracy, and it's probably now time to hand over the baton.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so let's just talk about this sort of the market as it is at the moment. I mean, I'm just going to bring up a screen share here of
yeah, before you do that, Jem, I can just sort of set the scene if you want, but yeah, you carry on.
No, I was just going to say, because I mean, part and parcel of what you said at the start about this conflict in feeling about the market and what it's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, some people think it's booming, some people think it's not sort of got off the floor yet. I mean, to sort of add weight to that, I'm just going to screen share this article, which was written by Bloomberg, so for Business Bloomberg last week, which was an incredibly sort of a powerful article. Can you see this?
Not full screen for me, but
okay. Let me just. I'm just going to enlarge it for you a second. So this is a report out there. Bear with me a second. There we go. And so it should start be growing now in your screen, so you can see a little bit. But one of the things that it said for me, which I was really interested in seeing, was the fact that home sales have jumped 48% to more than 81,000 in the first quarter. Mortgage rates have risen in March for the first time since 2010. So there's a lot of interesting things coming along here. Is this sort of what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I think that when we come onto the chart, I think it will show some of the disparity of figures. I think what we've had is, because it's the end of the first quarter in 2014, you've had a number of official institutions, government bodies, council of notaries, all issuing their sort of latest stats from January through to March, first quarter of 2014, and dependent on the the time series taken or the timing of the release, some of the sources overlap. There are just very differing figures. And it can be quite confusing. So you've got a range of figures going from, well, what's the drop been since 2007? Well, there's a whole range of between 30 and 50% in terms of price drops. What are the price dynamics now? Well, there's a whole range of quotes from, well, we're still at minus figures, minus 1.6 through to it's buoyant, minus 4% through to it's buoyant at nearly 2% growth. So dependent on which set of figures you look at, tends to shape what figures you're looking at. I think the one thing that's consistent is that volumes are up, and that foreign national buyers are a big chunk of those buyers and are driving those volumes up. So I don't know whether it's a good time to put the chart up, James, which shows the different figures.
Yeah, I think absolutely, because I think one of the biggest problems that we have on here is a confusion about which figures to trust and which to go on. So yeah, why don't we? Let me just open this up.
That kind of confusion doesn't just sort of refer to figures in Spain. That happens across the world, doesn't it? Everyone can produce figures, and depending on the questions they ask, will get different results. And often those surveys are done to fit the outcome that the survey provider is looking for.
Yeah, indeed, it's like here in the UK. You know, you have land registry figures, which are taken as being reliable because it takes the whole of the market and registration, but because of the time lag, because it's sort of 3-4 months out of date, so to speak, it's sort of its figures lag headline figures that you get from some of the major building societies and banks like Nationwide and Halifax, who are a bit more immediate, but then they don't cover the whole of the market. So yeah, you've got that trade-off, as you do here in the UK with a number of different sources. But one of the things that I feel is that sometimes the time frames that are quoted in the Spanish market differ quite significantly. So whilst you might get differences between Nationwide and Halifax figures and land registry or other official figures, they tend to be quoting the same sort of period, if you like, whether it's 12-month or quarterly basis, whereas some of the figures from Spain seem to sort of jump around. But there is one thing that is consistent, is that the economy is picking up, and that's been reported recently by the IMF, and it's growing at the fastest rate of the economy since 2008. So it's projected now to Spain is to move into positive growth in 2014, which will be for the first time. So it's projected to grow just under 1%, 0.9% in 2014, whereas it was a negative figure of minus 1.2% in 2013, and it has been for a number of years. So there's that augurs well. And the IMF also feels that Spain has made great inroads. I mean, part of that economic turnaround has been some of what the government has done in terms of getting to grips with the economy, making some very difficult financial decisions about tax, pensions, also in terms of the financial sector, the savings banks, like Cajas, the banks, sort of restructuring and ensuring they're better balanced, and also some labour reforms in terms of wage restraint. And what I often get is, I mean, I send out a monthly newsletter to my subscribers and clients where I update them with what's happening in the markets and any hot deals. And what I often get is, if I come up with a bit of good news, someone coming back and saying, well, hang on, I'm not seeing that, particularly when it comes to employment, because employment is so high in Spain. But I think that what the IMF is saying is it's starting to turn, you know, unemployment is starting to come down, but clearly those kind of figures and numbers take a while to filter down into the market, and particularly when people are seeing such high unemployment, you know, amongst youngsters. It's about 25% unemployment. So
yeah.
There is a bit of a lost generation, so to speak, and that will take a long while to rectify. But things are starting to head in the right direction. I think that's what the IMF comments are indicating.
I think, from my point of view, I think there's two real points to take from that. One is that the market is moving in the right direction, but it's coming from quite a low base. So so that's one thing to take into account. But I think you could also argue that Spain's in almost a better position than other countries, because it's been forced to make some quite difficult decisions and some quite drastic reforms to its banking sector, its employment, as you're saying, Louise. So it's actually in quite a good position to promote this growth in its economy. Whereas some of the other countries in the Eurozone, like France, for example, I know France has been experiencing pretty much flat economy for the last few quarters. And it wasn't forced into making those really drastic changes to its economy and how everything worked. And so it's not really got the impetus behind it to really pick up and kind of drive forward. And within the Eurozone, you know, there needs to be an economy aside from Germany which really does push forward. And Spain's in quite a good position to do that, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think the analogy is a good one, because if you look at what's happened to the bailout countries, if you look at Ireland, which held up its hands pretty early on and said, you know, we've got a problem, we need some help, and let's sort it out. They're now coming out the other end with a much cleaner bill of health. So they're now starting to turn things around. So where the harsh realities have been faced up to early on and been addressed, harsh as it has been, taking that sort of poison pill, it has helped them come out the other end. And I think that some of that we're starting to see in terms of the Spanish economy turning around, and then this mixed picture that we're seeing in the property market as well.
Mm.
Well, I'll tell you what, one thing just to bring in, and thanks for all the tweets which are coming in. And this, it gets rather shocking when you see these sorts of statistics, but I suppose statistics are what you want to make of them. But I mean, Sarah makes a comment here of, Spain youth employment rises to a record of 57.7%. So, I've always known the 25% figure. I mean, Sarah's saying it's even higher than that. So, it's funny though, because one of the things I also know as well is that unemployment hits its peak as a market is starting to turn. And that's one of the sort of the economic things that I've always understood. But there's a few questions coming in which I'll address as we go along. But Louise, it might not be the right time to bring in these these confusing figures to allow people making sense of them, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I'll be able to sort all that out. So let me just screen this share, and then perhaps you can talk us through all these various facts and figures.
Yeah, this might confuse rather than help. Paul, can you see that full screen? I don't know. I'm
going to put that in. There we go. How does that? Can you see all that, or shall I just enlarge it a little bit for you?
I only see it on the small icon, but it's fine. I've got a copy here. Can you see it on the full screen, Paul?
It comes up on James's screen when James is talking. So.
Okay. Well, I'll just talk through. So I'm not so sure whether this. I think it's an interesting chart, but I'm not sure whether it helps or hinders. But so what you've got are in the columns from left to right, you've got a number of different sources of property information. So going from the official statistics from like the Council of Notaries, Property Registrars, Housing Ministry, the INE, the IMF. Then you move more into sort of the private sector, Society of Valuers, and private house price indices like Knight Frank produce, and they all tell sort of a different version of the story. So if you look across on the first row, the 2007 peak comparables, you'll see that the Council of Notaries are saying that transactions are at 40% of what they were in July 2007. So they're saying it's a 60% fall in volume, and they're saying that prices are down 34% since July 2007. Whereas if you go to the Society of Valuers at the other end, they're saying that prices are down almost 50%, and the Housing Ministry in the middle are saying prices are down 31% since 2007. Now the Society of Valuers and the Housing Ministry, they look at square meter price, euro per square meter, so that's what they're basing their figures on. So I think it would be safe to say that prices are significantly down. Now, whether or not that's between 30 and 50%, I think a lot of agents would say that it's more 50%. Then, of course, a lot of agents will be looking at their micro market, their particular area, and what's happening on the ground. So drastic reductions in prices. And certainly volumes down hugely. Over half the market has been lost.
Actually,
now
Ruth, may I just ask a question on that in terms of the facts and figures you've given there, because I think it's a fascinating insight. Because in the past, in terms of advertising and marketing, what you would always say is that prices have dropped 30%, and what you get is you get a lot of the media jumping on these massive headline figures which are quoted, and they are so vastly different. Do you have a view on why they are different? Is it similar to in the UK when, quite simply, you have the nationwide versus the Halifax, and the net of figures that they pull in to generalise on, it's on completely different geographical areas? I mean, is this a classic case, and it comes back to the topic of this conversation, which is cities or Costas? Does it come down to that, or is there something else afoot? Are you aware of?
Well, I think, as I said, and some of it is time series, the time to release the data, analyse it, and release the data. So the Council of Notaries is I would say, quite a good source to look at, because I suppose it gets the figures out quite quickly. I suppose some of the government departments would take some time to analyse and produce data, so there'll be a sort of bit of a time lag. There is some overlap of sources. So, for example, the IMF, they might use statistical analysis from the OECD and from the Council of Notaries. Some of the private sector, like Knight Frank, will use a number of these government and official sources to produce its house price index, but I mean the official house price index is the one by the INE. But again, there's potentially a time lag between the INE producing that and Council of Notaries issuing their data. So it is quite tricky to call. You go on robustness of information and what's the official statistic, which would be the INE and the house price index, but then that might be sort of a bit of a time lag with that versus maybe some of the data from the notaries. So it's the same issue as in the UK.
Let's look at this. Let's look at this INE sort of underlying figure for now. Again, if you can see this, okay. So you have the INE in this column here. So do you want to just talk through these price dynamics for a second, Louise? Is that okay?
Yeah. So in terms of the price dynamics, again, if you look across all the different sources, you're seeing there's a range there saying that prices are down for the first quarter by the -4% through to positively growing at 1.6%. So the INE is saying that there are price falls year on year of -1.6%, and they split that out into -1% new, and resales are down -1.7%. But so what the INE is saying is that the fall in prices is slowing. So we're starting to turn a corner. But yet, if you look at the Council of Notaries, what they're saying is that the average price in the first quarter of 2014 is up +1.6% versus Q4 2013. So again, it's the time frames that are used. So that is quarter on quarter. So it's quarter 1 2014 compared to the last quarter 2013. And again, you can get very big differences in statistics, whether you're talking about Q1 2014 versus Q1 2013. That would give a more dramatic differential versus the last quarter of 2013. So it can be confusing, and it is worth looking at what's happening. I think that the key story from all of this is change is starting to happen, and whether you're it's marginally negative or its growth is at zero rate or just starting to grow again, prices are on the turn, and it's a really good time to be thinking about buying property. And what this tends to do is it opens up a whole lot of opportunities in Spain, whereas traditionally people have always thought about the Costas, Costa del Sol, Costa Blanca, for buying opportunities, whether it's for their holiday or home or to let out. This kind of price dynamic opens up opportunities within the cities as well, because what you're seeing in some of the main cities like Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia are properties at an all-time low or really, really low. And what that will be doing is providing really good yields for people. So, if you would have talked to me several years back, I wouldn't have been advocating buying in cities to deliver decent yields. But what we have been seeing recently, I've just had a buyer in Valencia. Now, she's bought something as a holiday home, but people have been buying there and delivering 10% yields, which would have been unheard of when prices were a lot higher several years back. So this price dynamic of low prices, potentially up to 50% of what they were in 2007, plus decent rental yields in some of the main cities, are making decent rental income, are making for some pretty decent yields, and you've got the potential of capital uplift as well. So the theme behind this is it's not just about the Costas. If people are looking, you can get a lot of the same quality of life from some of the coastal cities like Valencia or Barcelona. Madrid is a slightly different story because it's a capital city, and it's a slightly different feel to it, but it's opening up lots of opportunities.
I think as well the other thing to consider is that in terms of your rental yields and being able to rent out the property, you don't have in the cities what you may have on some of the Costas, which is the surplus of property.
Yeah.
So there's not so much property available, there's not so much around for people to choose from. and that also may have an impact on the capital uplift and the prices going up, because once the market does start to turn, and once other people start getting interested in looking at the cities again, then again there's not that surplus of property, so the prices of the property that is available that's all going to rise a lot quicker. Because on the Costas, obviously the surplus of property will need to be eaten up before the prices really start rising again. So that's another thing to take into account, and hopefully we'll see that the market start to pick up quite nicely.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, Paul, because it's, you know, in the cities you're probably, generally speaking, looking at more resale properties than new build properties. And it's not to say that you can get 10% yields across the board in all of the cities, because there are some very expensive suburbs in all of those cities, in Valencia, Barcelona, Madrid. But it's picking out those suburbs where you can pick somewhere that you want to live or that someone would want to go holidaying in. But be prepared to look at some resale property. I mean, if it's only going to cost you €1,000 to put in a new bathroom, so it does have a slightly different feel to it in terms of what you might buy. But that's absolutely right. The cities are also not suffering from the same gluts of new builds that you might find in areas on the various Costas. Plus, also cities, you know, there's year-round living. I mean, there are places in some of the sort of Costa towns and cities where that is the case as well. You've got year-round living, you've got workers. There's generally greater level of demand for rental property, so you're less likely to have some of the you're likely to have better occupancy rates and less voids. I think that what's happened with some of the Costa properties is, because of the property downturn and people not having an exit strategy, those people that have owned holiday homes, the circumstances have changed and they want to sell up, or they haven't been able to, and then they've rented out their properties. You've ended up with a lot of accidental landlords on the Costas who've all been chasing the same rental income, and so it's generated a sort of a downward spiral of prices in some respects on some of the bigger complexes where everybody's competing for the same rental income, and so, you know, they haven't been able to generate some of the rental income that they wanted, you know, to cover costs or whatever, so yields have become lower. So it's an interesting dynamic at the moment.
Do you know what? It is an interesting dynamic, and I have to say, I think it really depends on the buyer, because there are people out there who will want the cities, and they will be looking at this, and the motivation will be purely, look, I'm going to buy because I want to rent my property and I want a decent yield. And the difference between 2007, where if you're getting a 5% yield, it was pretty good, and just for the sort of the people out there who are not familiar with yields, basically it's a calculation to determine how much of an income you're getting on your rental income, and generally 5 to 10% is deemed acceptable. And if you're getting over 10% now, obviously rental investors are going to look at that and say, actually, this is a viable resource. But that really, to me, that strives of slightly younger dynamic. It's sort of investors who are looking at returns. And certainly at the moment, the cities in Spain, in my view, are offering that. But it's funny, because I always feel that the Costas offer something completely different. I think the Costas are looking more at more permanent living. I think they're looking at more people who want to spend 3 or 4 months out there in the winter time, and if they rent it, they rent it. So I just think, really and truly, you've got to look at your buyer profile and decide whether they want the cities or whether they want the Costas. And I don't know what you think, Paul, as to if you would agree with that. But I think the Costas just offer something different.
I think you're right. I think it's to a large extent, and maybe Louise will be able to back this up, but to a large extent, I think you've got a different kind of buyer who's going to be buying, and perhaps, as you say, you'll be looking much more at people who are pure investors who are looking at the cities and looking at Spain as an opportunity, like they do with any other market. If it's a market which is just about on the turn, just about reached its floor, then that's the prime time for them to get in and start looking at investment properties, and they may not want to use the property themselves at all. And perhaps their ideal in that case is to have a local resident who wants to rent the property and have an annual contract on it, rather than looking at holiday lets and looking at renting out in that way. Whereas on the Costas, I think you're right. You'll be seeing people much more who are buying to use it themselves, and then as a bonus, would like to rent it out when they're not there.
Yeah, I mean, if I just may, I'll just bring this in from Charlotte, who's just saying, great, why do you think the great old Costa Blanca is coming back into vogue? And I'm not so sure it's necessarily just the Costa Blanca, personally. I think there's a few Costas down there where a lot of people, that market is surging back. And this is why I think Spain is such a unique proposition, whether it is for city investment or whether it is for Costa enjoyment. That's how I used to break them up, sort of like a lifestyle product and an investment product. Is the simple fact is that from most British cities, you're looking at 2.5 to 3 hours in the plane. So you could literally, if you're owning a property in Spain, you could jump in that plane on a Friday night because you're so fed up of working in Manchester, like you, Paul, and go, well, actually, hang on a second, I need to get out of Manchester. I've got to get down to Alicante and just go and sit on the beach for a while. And I think that's a unique proposition from any overseas property purchase, that when you've got that accessibility, it is... I don't think there's many out there. I mean, even France, I would say, is difficult in terms of the accessibility that Spain offers. So, that's why I always think it's a relatively solid investment. If you're buying for the right reasons, you're doing the right research, you're using the right people, and you buy the right property.
Yeah, and I think it's all to do with the timing as well, James. Hence, I think this hangout now, because as prices do rise, and we can argue and debate about how soon that will be, how quickly they will rise, there is a window of opportunity. But once prices rise, and you could argue whether they will ever get back to what they were in 2007, that's a moot point. But I think, again, on my chart, which is trying to make some sense of all of the confusing figures out there, on the bottom row, I put a sort of little
I'll put it up for you, Louise. Hang on, I'll just put it up for you so people can see what you're talking about.
So on that bottom row, it's a sort of confidence of turn point, as in, are we now reaching a point at which things are starting to change in Spain on the property market? And from what I've been reading from the Council of Notaries, property registrars, the IMF, there's certainly a feeling that Spain is at a turning point, and whether those house prices are going to start to move into consistently positive figures across the board, across all of the sources in 2014 or 2015. Again, there's not a unanimous feeling on that, but certainly Fitch, the credit ratings, they feel as though 2014 is the year for bottoming out, and 2015 is when it's going to start to turn. So there are a number of statistical houses and official sources that are now starting to see that things are at a turn point. Can I just bring in a sort of a theory in this and just put it to you and see what you think of this, Louise? Now, you've also put in here golden visas incentivize 72 residential buyers. It's just a little bit here, which was a report written by the Council of Notaries. Now, one of the questions we had in actually prior to this broadcasted hangout was what impact do you think the golden visas have had on the market since its introduction? Now, I put to you that actually one of the reasons why looking at Spain as viable now is that there's a surge of overseas people coming in to say, well, actually, hang on a minute, we're getting a visa into Europe. How much do you think this is making an impact on A, confidence, and B, property prices and volume that we've talked about so far? I think there's a lot of anecdotal information out there. I think there are a number of agents who are quoting the effect of these golden visas. I think that creates a sense of potentially a lot more interest than there has been, or there may well be a lot more inquiries that aren't turning into sales. Because when you actually look at the criteria, it's not quite so golden and gilt-edged as it might at first seem. You might have Indian buyers, Far Eastern buyers, Russians, Chinese. These are all nationalities who have been quoted as being interested in the golden visa. But it's not a surefire route to getting nationality somewhere else, because it's 500,000 pounds worth euros. So 500,000 euros worth of property, which doesn't have to be one property, it can be a number of properties. My understanding is that has to be unencumbered, so it has to be mortgage free, so it's cash buying. And it's only when you've done that and you live there legally for 2 years that then gets reviewed. And then after 5 years you can apply for a residence permit, and it's only after 10 years that you can then apply for Spanish nationality. So I think on the face of it, it all looks really, really good. Maybe there's been a lot of interest, a lot of inquiries, but maybe sort of, the scratch and sniff test, when people have sort of scratched a little bit further under the surface, it's probably not smelt quite so good. There could be a whole number of reasons, but there certainly seems to be a lot of talk about it. It's been in the press a lot. But the hard numbers so far are what's coming out of the notary. Again, there might be a time lag with those figures. The next release of data about the number of people who have bought incentivized by the golden visas, that may change. It might suddenly mushroom. But I suspect that by the time you come through this funnel effect of interest, looking into it, what does it actually mean for me? I think that has a very sobering effect on the actual real numbers that are coming through.
I think that's a good point. That I think there is a little bit of a lag in terms of the figures coming through. So we may have to wait another 3 or 4 months before we get a clear picture of exactly what effect that legislation might have had. In sort of fairly typical Spanish style, it's one of those things that was announced with great fanfare, and then actually took about 6 months to decide exactly how it was going to work and how the legislation would happen. Which I suppose takes a little bit of the wind out of the sails in a lot of ways. But I think it does bring in a kind of an interesting point in that you need to look at the motivations for people buying. If people are buying purely to get a visa or a European passport, then there may be other countries within Europe that are offering a golden visa program which have less conditions to adhere to, so it may be easier. But if people are looking at it from an investment point of view, and then the kind of the visa is the bonus on top of that, then you may see them start to come through a little bit later on, which is where the time lag in the figures might sort of help to explain it a little bit. I think some of the other countries that are offering the golden visa, as I say, if it's purely from a visa point of view, they may have less conditions attached to the purchase and maybe a lower entry level as well. So they may be, those people may be attracted to other countries.
Yeah, that's true. It has become a bit of a sort of a competition amongst a number of countries who are offering similar things, like Portugal and other countries that are so doing. And it's a very valid point, Paul. I mean, it is only really recent. So what we might be seeing is just the trickle of the first numbers coming through, and it will be interesting to see the next round of numbers, to see whether it stays steady at the hundreds rather than the thousands, or whether we suddenly see it mushrooming. But yeah, it might be one of those things that's got more publicity than substance. But yeah,
let's be honest. It's a great PR angle. I mean, it really is, because you said it's this funnel, and I think there's a great analogy there, Louise, because ultimately all Spain wants, Portugal wants, and anybody wants for that matter, is a bit of publicity. And if suddenly that hits the national press that you can buy something in Spain and get a visa, that gets an awful lot of interest in the country. And it may not just be on the property side, because the amount of publicity it gets is, oh, Spain, I love Spain, let's go on holiday there. It gets the PR for the country, so it doesn't surprise me they've done this. But look, ultimately, this hangout is to discuss sort of cities and Costas. So why don't we sort of enthuse a little bit about what you guys would do? And I'm going to start with Louise and say, look, Louise, what are your top tips for the cities, and what are your top tips for the Costas? Where would you go?
From a pure hard-nosed investment, well, not pure hard-nosed investment, because it is also about the lifestyle, which is where we've sort of said. But in terms of the cities that we've mentioned, like Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, in terms of buying property value for money and cheaply, I would say that and the potential for getting the highest yields, I would say that would be somewhere like Valencia. If you think about it, prices in Madrid and Barcelona are generally going to be a little bit higher. Madrid being the capital city, and oddly, Barcelona property in Barcelona is quite well matched with the property prices in Madrid. But you can probably in Madrid get slightly more rental income. So out of the two, whilst I would prefer to be living in Barcelona than Madrid, you could probably get slightly better rental income and slightly better yields in Madrid. But if you were looking for, out of those three, the better yields out of all of them, I would say it would be somewhere like Valencia, because the property prices are lower on average than in places like Madrid and Barcelona. So in terms of getting decent yields by the coastal city, beach, marina, art, you know, all of that stuff. It's a place that has got a train station, a metro, marina, airport nearby. They're all great, and it will be down to the individual whether they're looking pure investment versus mixing a bit of lifestyle. So that would be my choice out of the cities. In terms of Costas, I mean, they're also varied, but ones that have been very popular, Costa del Sol, the age-old favourite for Brits and a number of other nationalities as well. In the Costa Blanca, you know, in a place like Javier Denia, you know, you get more of a mix of nationalities. You get more Scandinavians, and I'll probably get someone from the Costa del Sol. Hang on a minute, we've got all of those down here as well. But you get the Germans and the Scandinavians going there as well. So it feels a little bit more mixed. And again, wonderful places there on the coast. You have got year-round living if you want it, or more resort living if you just want to be going out there on a holiday and you're not bothered about sort of the out-of-season living. But certainly those places, Costa Blanca and sort of the Marbella area, seem to be picking up, and certainly in terms of the number of inquiries on an anecdotal basis, and number of inquiries that I've been getting, Costa del Sol trumps Costa Blanca, but I know that from reported statistics, Costa Blanca is doing very well, and they are the areas which are representing, you know, decent chunks, decent volumes of housing stock and property stock that is starting to sell at the moment. So they are leading the way, if you like, in terms of the upturn of the property market, both in terms of volume and prices.
And Paul, what about you? Where would you go, cities and Costas?
I think in terms of cities, I think Valencia is a very, very good one to mention, because you are also very close to the Costas, you're very close to the coast and kind of the holiday lifestyle. But I think in terms of cities, much like in the UK, where it's not all about London, it's not all about investing in property in London, you might want to look outside of the main cities. And places like Bilbao and San Sebastian are very, very important cultural centres, and also very popular with the tourist trade. So I think there's possibilities to look in those cities and to see what the rental yields and the property prices are like, because you may have a lower entry level, you may have as good or better rental yields that you can get involved in as well. Outside of that, looking at the Costas, I think again, as Louise said, you have the traditional destinations. Again, on Costa del Sol, Costa Blanca, you're still going to face a lot of competition from other people renting, and also there's still that surplus of property there. So I wouldn't necessarily expect that market to turn around quite as quick as some of the others. And the other one not to forget, of course, is the islands and the Balearics and the Canaries, and I think there's great opportunities to be had on the islands. They're still really, really popular with tourists, and still they haven't necessarily suffered the huge amount of oversupply that some of the Costas have.
I think that's a really good point, because ultimately, let's be honest, they're an island. I mean, they've only got so much space, and you know, price is always going to go up because people need it. It's a supply and demand issues, isn't it, at the end of the day? But okay, I'm going to stick my 2 pennies worth in here. Cities, for me, I have to say Barcelona all the way. Because I get city and beach in the same place, and I think as an investment you can't go wrong with it. And they've got a good football team. And on the Costas, that is a tough one, isn't it? That is a real tough one. I think you hit the nail on the head, Louise, with North Costa Blanca. I think the Javier Denia and all that, like, it's just beautiful. Oh, the hills, the artist colonies and all that sort of stuff. I mean, they're really beautiful places. But equally, and it's one we haven't mentioned, is the Costa Murcia, sort of in between Almeria and Costa Blanca. And I think it's a little hidden sort of, well, it's not that hidden, but it's a little pocket which traditionally has not been as popular because it's sort of bridged these two mammoth costas. But I've always believed that with sort of the airports supposedly opening up at some point, with Paramount Park supposedly opening up at some point, with all these sort of things happening, even without that, it's a beautiful little costa which is often forgotten, and it offers quite a lot for it.
I think on that, James, I think that it possibly doesn't have quite the same characteristics as some of the other costas do. You know, a number of buyers are looking for this sort of idyllic, whitewashed Andalusian, village, and I think that some of the architecture on that particular Costa Calida is probably not quite the same. And interestingly, Murcia, that whole area is one of the ones that has suffered most in the property market through I suspect a lot of oversupply. You know, there's a lot of golfing properties inland as well. So I think that yeah, I thought that the whole Paramount theme park, airport, that all goes through. Then that's a fantastic story for that part of Spain. But a lot hinges on that.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, to pull itself out of the property market doldrums, really.
Okay, well, I think, I mean, we're getting close to the hour mark, and I'm very conscious that, I mean, there's so much more that we can talk about, and rental is a big thing, and I know that we wanted to look at rental and the legalities of rental because it's all changing, and I think we all need to be aware of it, but I'm really keen on getting Louise back in again to talk about all that sort of stuff, because I think it could almost be a show in itself, so we will certainly revisit that. But Louise and Paul, I'm going to give you one final question, which is, I'm going to give you £150,000. Right, so it's a decent budget. Are you going to go City or are you going to go Costa? Come on, Louise. I think I know where Louise is going. City or Costa?
It may well be Costa Blanca, actually.
Oh, it surprises me.
Really?
Yeah, I thought you were City all the way.
Oh, City all the way?
Yeah, I did.
Well, it depends. I've got other investment property anyway, so I'm needing to plug the gap of a holiday home. So you know, and yeah. So, but I love Valencia, and I mean, I've adored being in Barcelona and Valencia. But you know, if I wanted a holiday home, but if I wanted to mix and get some income while I wasn't using it, it would certainly be Valencia or Barcelona.
Oh, I'm taking your first answer. That was absolutely Costa. And Paul, here's 150. What are you going to buy, Costa or City?
I think personally, I would go City. I would go City now. I would use it purely for investments. I probably wouldn't use the City property myself, and use the rental yield to travel around the Costas, really.
Oh, that's a clever answer. I like that.
Yeah. And actually, none of them are that far away, are they? I mean, Valencia is on the Costa Blanca. You know, from Valencia you can get to Javier, Denia, all of those places as well. So, best of both worlds.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to give myself 150,000, and I'm going to split you two, and I am going to say, without a shadow of doubt, Costas for me. And I tell you why. It's because there is nothing like a sandy beach in Spain. Because I always think the sand in Spain, when you're walking on the blue flag beaches, and however many tens of beaches they have which are blue flag, for me, you cannot beat that moment. And what I always say I used to say to a lot of the clients that we used to have was sitting on a balcony with a glass of wine in an evening, and the temperature's lovely, and you're in a Spanish way of life, and it's just wonderful to do. I don't think you can beat that in a Costa.
Yeah,
so I'm a bit biased.
Just, I mean, your point about the rentals, and that's probably the subject of a whole new Google Hangout. The thing to bear in mind is that when people are looking at buying the city, they do need to be aware of what changes are afoot on the rental regulations. There are some places in Barcelona where there are strong regulations, so it's about checking out with a local tourist office about what the impending changes are and what zones are, because each of the autonomous regions are looking at what they do for rental regulation. And I know that, you know, in Mallorca and the Balearics, there are strong rental regulations, and they actually they license properties there. That's not to say that on mainland Spain we're going down the route of licensing, and it may only affect holiday lets. So if someone's looking at long-term rentals, it might not affect them at all, but it is worth just checking locally in the specific region that someone wants to buy, just to make sure you know, they're comfortable with that, and get independent legal advice, of course.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, I think we need to put that in the diary, don't we, for an entire sector about rentals, because it is very confusing for everybody out there. So is there any further thoughts to finish off? Paul, have you got anything to finalise on?
I just think that Spain is really a market to watch at the moment. I know it's the kind of thing that people in the property industry say all the time, but I do think that we're getting to that point where the market is ready to turn around. I think we've been through the worst of the pain with Spain. I think everything is starting to get ready to pick up again. And the reasons that people go to Spain and people that want to buy in Spain or want to live in Spain have remained the same throughout the recession, and that will always be there. It's still, as James said, it's still really accessible. The lifestyle's fantastic. The food's fantastic. It's a great way of life, and those are the things that will always remain.
Absolutely. Louise, any final thoughts for you?
Just to say that we have been talking really in terms of generalities and averages and all the rest of it, and there are parts of cities where you might not be able to get the kind of yields we've talked about, but it is really picking the right areas where it's possible to do that, and that's where sort of that combination of foreign national buyer advice and local in-market knowledge comes into play. So it's important that, you know, discuss specifics rather than just leaving it at the level of generalities.
Absolutely, and sort of to finish off from my side, with Louise, with your permission, that the table that you've made, I presume we can use that and spread that around for people to actually see what's going on if you are happy, so that people can have a look at that.
Well, yeah, if people want to get in contact, you know, so we can send it to them. I don't use Google Google account much for messaging. I'm assuming that you can message in the same way on that as Facebook.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we'll have a chat afterwards about whether or not we can stream it through the BuyAssociation website, and we can send it off to people so that they can actually see it. And what I was going to say was that don't forget, obviously, BuyAssociation have got the buying guides as a very, very useful and recently updated Spanish buying guide, which I think is about to come out, and that is accessible on the buyassociation.co.uk website. And hopefully that will give you all the informed and independent advice that you would need to go ahead and make a good decision based on fact rather than sort of bias advice out there, and that's what obviously BuyAssociation is all about. So I hope that's been a help. I must say thank you obviously to Paul as always, and Louise. Your knowledge, it scares me how much is in that head of yours, but thank you as always, and we look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
So cheers guys, thanks so much, thanks for joining. Cheers.
Bye.